Thank you, everybody. And I have to start with an apology. Something has kicked off at work, as whenever I have a cunning plan to avoid work for a day, the gods of misrule interfere. So I'm having to leave after this talk. But please do contact me by email if there's anything that comes up after this. And I'm so sorry to not be able to be here and take part more. Yes, it's completely unavoidable and extremely irritating. And I'm also going to keep my watch in my hand so that I can make sure I keep to time. So, first slides first. There we go. For those of you who don't know, the Foundling Museum is in London. This is it. It's very sweet. It looks like a doll's house, I would think. And we are situated in Bloomsbury, so about equidistant between King's Cross Station and the British Museum. And the museum sits on the site of the Foundling Hospital, which was the UK's first children's charity and also the UK's first public art gallery, and we will get onto that. It was founded by Royal Charter in 1739, and it was established to take in babies who would otherwise have been abandoned on the streets of London. What's interesting is that this idea of abandonment, that there are two absent presences, I feel, hugely in the museum, women and children. And where they are represented, that their representation in the historic collection of the museum is very much situates them in the areas of sort of victimhood, objectified, and yet at the same time absent. The way that the Foundling Hospital worked was that, and what was different from every other foundling hospital in the world, there had been foundling hospitals since about the 13th century, but most had been run by the Catholic Church. So when the Foundling Hospital in London was set up, it was obviously Church of England, Anglican. And the big difference at the Foundling Hospital in London is that from the very beginning, the governors wanted to make sure that if a woman's situation ever changed, she would be able to come back and claim her child. And so in order to do this, there needed to be systems in place to be able to identify child and as it went through the system and link it to mother. We have very few works of art in the collection that specifically reference the mother's experience. This is one. It's actually representing a mother at the Paris Foundling Hospital, and the system that they used in France was the same really right across the world, which what you can see is that she is placing her baby in a hatch in the wall. By the side of the window, just by her hand, is a bell pull, and that she will pull the bell. A bell will ring inside the Foundling Hospital. She will put her baby in, turn the turntable, and somebody on the other side of the wall will take her baby. And for this mother, for these mothers, there is no possible hope for reunion or reclamation. And obviously, you can see that although O'Neill is obviously, the work is very much about rousing sympathy and inspiring sympathy, the mother herself is fairly generic. This work, however, which is unusual in our collection because it's by a female artist, Emma Brownlow. And Emma Brownlow was the daughter of the gentleman that you see in this painting, who is John Brownlow, who was himself a foundling and kind of rose up through the ranks of the Foundling Hospital to become its secretary in the end, the chief exec. And he was the Foundling Hospital's longest-serving secretary. In Emma's work, again, kind of an unusual and very rare reference in our collection to the foundling children and the mothers, and here you have the foundling restored to its mother. And what you can see on the ground between mother and child is the receipt that she would have been given, which by the 19th century was the mechanism by which child and mother could be reunited. And again, here, I think, as in a lot of the images that we have, the image of the mother and of the child, it's more, in a sense, it's really there as a vehicle for illustrating the narrative of charity and this key element of the Foundling Hospital that made it so unusual, which was the potential, the possibility always for reunion. But Brownlow, aka the hospital, is very much the centre stage, and the mechanism by way this reunion can take place. Now, what's interesting about the Foundling Hospital is that it continued on the Bloomsbury site until 1926, when it relocated outside London, first temporarily to Redhill and then to Berkhamsted, where a new purpose-built school was built for it. And this image comes from Berkhamsted. The Berkhamsted Foundling Hospital site ran until 1954, at which point the charity moved from an institution for children to placing children within the community through fostering and adoption. And it continues today as the children's charity Quorum, which is one of the leading children's charities and adoption charities in the country. But of course, what this means is that there are several hundred former pupils who are still alive. And what's remarkable is that the system that they went through in terms of admission and education and training was fundamentally unchanged from the system that was set up in the 18th century. And they are a remarkable piece of living history. And we have in the collection a great many photographs and, of course, 900 linear feet of hospital archive that's kept in the London Metropolitan Archive. But again, these photos and this archive material, it very much still, it's about documentary evidence, and the children themselves are, in a sense, almost the artifacts in these images. And although the hospital had a very good standard of care, it's hard not to assume that the children are effectively on their best behaviour, because I think if anybody has had their school photo taken, we all know that it's not entirely 100% the truth. The Foundling Hospital was, as I said, not only the UK's first children's charity, but its first public art gallery. And the reason for this was that from the very beginning, leading artists of the day were supporters of the charity. And in this initiative was really started by the artist William Hogarth. It's interesting because Hogarth, although he and Handel, who was another great supporter, and Thomas Coram, who was the founder of the Foundling Hospital, whose portrait this is, the three of them were all childless, so it's an amazing story of empathy, apart from anything else. But Hogarth, for those of you who know his biography, spent 5 years of his childhood in the Fleet prison when his father went bankrupt. And I think he had a very keen understanding from lived experience of how easily bad things happen to good people, and how families could fall through the cracks in the 18th century in the blink of an eye, and there was nothing really there to support them. So Hogarth he had skin in the game, and he was this great supporter. He was also an artist who was trying to establish a school of British art, and I think this great entrepreneurial spirit that he had, his friend Thomas Coram was building this brand new charity that from the beginning had detractors on the outskirts of London, and the charity needed to attract the attention and the money of polite society. So how to bring them there? Hogarth was trying to find a way to promote contemporary British art when the received wisdom at the time was that good art was French or Italian. And of course, he saw all of this empty wall space, and he saw an opportunity. And so he donated the first work in 1740, the year after the Royal Charter, which is this, I think many would say, his greatest portrait of his friend Thomas Coram, and then set about encouraging all of the artists of the day to donate work as well. So we have the most extraordinary collection, which is really the contemporary British art world of the mid-18th century in microcosm. It contains work by Reynolds and Gainsborough and Ramsay and Hudson and Ricebrack and Roubiliac, and also this is our courtroom. This whole room is original to the 18th century building. It wasn't just the painters and the sculptors, it was plasterers. You have William Wilton, who donated all of this wonderful stucco plasterwork. You have the King's master mason, Duval, who donated the fire surround. Just off screen, the architect Sanderson, a beautiful pier table of his. On the far wall, you can see a work by Hogarth. And just off frame to the right of the fireplace is a beautiful roundel by a 21-year-old Thomas Gainsborough, who had just arrived in London. So it's this great creative endeavour, joined subsequently by Handel, who did annual benefit concerts. And so an awful lot of our story and the way that we work is really considering the agency of the artist in society and how artists are able to change opinion, galvanize opinion, shine a light on things which are under people's noses but not sort of being addressed. but also that very inspiring story that all of us, each of us, have something in our skill set that can be brought to bear to help make a difference, and in this case, in the difference to the lives of children who are on the margins of society and some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. So a significant percentage, probably the majority of our collection in terms of the paintings, are portraits, and they are portraits of the governors and key benefactors of the Foundling Hospital. Now, all of these men were remarkable in their own way, and almost all of them are men. When I arrived, there was only one portrait of a securely identified woman. You can see her in the background on the far left. At the time, she was catalogued as Mrs. Patrick Forbes. She is now Beatrice Forbes, if you come to the museum. She was one of the very first female governors. Women were not allowed to be governors until the 20th century. And rather brilliantly, we'd always assumed that this portrait had been commissioned because her father had been treasurer and she was a governor, and then her husband became a governor. And no. We discovered that she left this portrait to the Foundling Hospital in her will. So clearly, as a woman, she was like, if it's the last thing I'm going to do, they're going to get a woman on the walls of this place. However, we have all of these portraits. And so, one of the challenges when I arrived at the museum 11 years ago was, this is a story that's about childhood and about children and about women, which is another issue. But it is not a very child-friendly collection. I mean, and to be perfectly honest, for lots of people, it's not a particularly friendly collection at all in terms of, it says people's automatic thing. Although, what is amazing about our museum is that it is a very human and very powerful story, and it is the only museum I have ever worked in where it is very frequent to have not just visitors, but often staff and volunteers in tears. It is a very emotional space. So, in fact, the story is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but nevertheless, it is not necessarily an obviously child-friendly space. What is very compelling, and as I mentioned, was, in a sense, the archive, the things that talk about the system that the children went through. And for those of you who know us, probably the thing you know us most for are the tokens. In the 18th century, the system that was used to identify the babies, because they were all given new names, they were all baptised on being admitted to the Foundling Hospital. Each child had a billet, an admission record, which is what you see on the right. And in the top right-hand corner, you can see the child's unique admission number. They wore this around their neck at all times. It was a sackable offence for a member of staff to remove the admission number. And then you have the date that the child was admitted into the Foundling Hospital, its age, its sex. They would often quickly jot down what the baby was wearing. Initially, the babies were coming in under 2 weeks old. Any identifying marks upon the body. This, interestingly, was just birthmarks or scars. We have been doing the results of a collaborative PhD with the University of Warwick is being manifest in an exhibition this autumn, looking at Black and Asian babies who came into the Foundling Hospital, and that is not noted on their birth records. So it's been a case of finding needles that you assume are in the haystack, but you're not quite sure where to look, because these references come in kind of as sort of throwaway remarks from wet nurses or wet nurse inspectors. So these are the billets. And then the way the identification worked was that a piece of fabric was cut from the baby's clothes, cut in half. Half was given to the mother, and half was pinned to the admission sheet. And the idea is that if a mother was ever in a position to reclaim her child, all she needed was her piece of fabric and to remember the date that she brought her child. And they could open the admissions for that day, match the fabric, find the unique admission number, and in the general register, that number would tell them what the baby was now called and where it was in the system. But mothers were also asked to bring with them something that was small enough to be folded into the billet. They were closed like letters and sealed, that would be a backup if anything happened to the fabric. And these tokens are enormously powerful. They are vehicles of hope, really, hope that the mother would be able to return. This one is one of my favourites because it's a rebus. So the I.W. Ant, I want relief, from 1789, came in with this particular baby. So it's an amazingly powerful, the tokens and the billets, and a lot of this archive material is incredibly emotionally powerful and is an amazing canvas onto which people can project their own responses, personal but also creative. I won't talk about the work that we do, obviously, with young people. This is critical for us. It is about our continuing DNA, about enabling very gifted artists of all disciplines to work alongside vulnerable and marginalised young people. Our core, reflecting our history, our core areas of work are early years, children in care, and particularly care-experienced adults leaving the care system. We do a lot of work in acute paediatric wards, both transplant wards and psychiatric wards, and then also working with families. We are at a cross-section of 4 wards that have above UK average levels of childhood poverty, so we have partnerships with local nurseries and do a lot of work in the early years and then folding that into the family programme. So this is what's happening, in a sense, behind the scenes. But front of house, which is what we're talking about, the challenge is, how do you turn this story of childhood into something that's child-friendly and also relevant to people today? And how do you make how do you make present these absences, the children and the mothers? And so one of the first things I did when we arrived was to reanimate this relationship with artists, with contemporary artists. And so throughout our programming, it's about enabling artists to respond to our collection directly. This is just a particular illustration. It's one that I love, having just shown you one of the tokens. This is work by the artist David Shrigley that we commissioned as part of an exhibition back in 2013. And he has taken as his start point, if you take the second row of tokens from the bottom, second in from the left, this extraordinary token that just says, "This is a token." And David used that as a kind of start point for his work. And that idea of, as I said, a kind of a reanimation, a kind of breathing life, again, into our story and enabling people to look again. But another key one for us is our exhibitions, and we use our exhibitions as a way of highlighting ideas and issues that have a contemporary relevance and enabling people, like our artists, to have a dialogue across history. So in kind of no particular order, but mainly because these were shows that I particularly loved. This was the show we had back in 2017 called Basic Instincts, which was looking at the artist Joseph Highmore, who was a direct contemporary of Hogarth's, and we have 2 works by Highmore in the collection. And it was really looking, at its simplest, at the way that Joseph Highmore was calling out the normalisation of sexual abuse towards women in the 18th century. I think there's no better way of putting it. And particularly showing this work that had never been shown in the UK before, called The Angel of Mercy, which we believe to be the only contemporary representation of infanticide anywhere in the world. What you can actually see is a well-dressed woman from the mid-18th century who is in the process of garroting the baby in her lap with the sash of her dress. And she is being stopped by the Angel of Mercy and pointed backwards to the Foundling Hospital, which is on the horizon. It is an astonishing painting. It is an astonishing work. And alongside this, we showed the artist Rachel Kneebone and her extraordinary work. She works in porcelain, which, of course, we have a number of porcelain works in the collection. And her work has this very strange, seductive and beautiful and yet kind of repelling and quite sinister quality. And they're kind of these wonderful objects. So it's never a case of A plus B equals C. So Rachel's work was shown in the main body of the exhibition, of the museum, and the Highball show was down in our temporary exhibition gallery. But again, just trying to tease out some of these ideas for people. Portraying pregnancy, the first exhibition ever to consider the pregnant portrait from Holbein through to Beyoncé was the earliest. And this is a wonderful work as well by Jenny Saville that she reworked for the exhibition. So really thinking about pregnancy and maternal mortality and its representation and ideas of taboo and how these have shifted. but also things that are more, I suppose you could say, activist. So this was a show we did in 2019 called Bedrooms of London, which was really illustrating how the lack of social housing in London was directly leading to childhood poverty and children living in poverty. And it was an exhibition that had photographs, a single photograph representing the bedroom of a child in each of the London boroughs who were living in poverty. And then part of it was also about a call to action for our visitors. And we had this big wall graphic which illustrated a big report that the Childhood Trust, who are our partners on this exhibition, had just published. And that report was accessible. There was a takeaway for everybody if they wanted to take it, which gave them kind of 3 options for action following the exhibition if they wanted to get involved. And we did similar calls to action with our Child's Play exhibition with the artist Mark Neville. So this is another way of kind of raising this issue of childhoods, and drawing attention to contemporary situations, using the past as a way to frame the present and encourage people to get involved. Currently on at the moment, we have our Superheroes exhibition looking at the representation of orphaned, adopted, fostered and found characters in comics from around the world for the last 125 years. And again, this exhibition is really highlighting the impact of the childhood trauma on the adult, and how the levels of kind of resilience that are required for care experienced people to navigate the world, and the way that the world does or does not acknowledge their presence. So in the spirit of Hogarth, our exhibition's always very engaging and very good fun, but are working hard to get people to think. But the collection, I think, is really key. It's what do we do permanently to bring childhood and bring children into the sort of front and centre, and find ways to involve the children of the past and the children of the present in our storytelling. This is our introductory gallery, which is what sets the scene for visitors who've never been before. And what you can see in the background on the far left is an orange speech bubble. And through all of the different effective chapters of this introductory gallery, these speech bubbles are directed directly at our younger visitors. And the questions that they pose are designed to enable children to go straight to the heart of our story, to not shy away from the issues that are difficult and challenging, but to get them to think and feel and question the issues, as I said, that go to the heart of our story. But we also find ways to involve young people and their responses to our collection in all sorts of different ways. We have QR codes that enable people to hear some of our care experienced graduates from our training program talk about objects. But this is a project that I love. We have a kind of an ongoing relationship with Central St Martin's, and this is one of a number of projects that we've run with their BA jewellery design, and the students all pick an object in our collection that they then use as an inspiration to create a piece of jewellery that then at the final exhibition is placed next door to its object. So you have a beautiful necklace that was inspired by the suitcase that foundlings were, when they left the foundling hospital, carried their few possessions with them. And then the wonderful Barbie dolls who were wearing these little outfits. But again, enabling younger voices to come in and take control of our story. It's also about having something that children, when they come into, as I said, with all of those portraits, enabling younger visitors to see themselves in our collection and to see themselves in images that give them a sense of autonomy. And this is a wonderful work by the artist Mark Neville, who I said we showed with Child's Play, and this is a work that he has effectively given to us, which is very powerful and very direct in its gaze, and sets up I mean, it's hard not to see that young child, that amazing way that children sort of borrow adult expressions, and it's uncanny, and it's a work that has huge power. But it's also finding works that reference children and reference their experience and reference it in ways that are celebratory and inclusive and also creative, so moving away from that victimhood and objectification. On the left, you have big work that we commissioned from the artist Michael Craig Martin. You have, which sits at the very top of our staircase, and again speaks directly. It was inspired by our tokens, and there's a wonderful text by Michael next to it, but it is very powerful, and you can hear young voices squeaking in recognition when they see it. In the centre, a wonderful work that we commissioned of the writer Jacqueline Wilson, who is one of our fellows, and when she became a fellow in 2008, she wrote Hetty Feather, which at the time was her first historical children's novel, which is now 6 novels and I think has sold over 35 million copies, and we have BBC TV series and a stage play, and I would say 90% of the families who come to the museum come because they want to see where Hetty lived, and Hetty is a fictional 19th century foundling. So again, seeing an author that children love and feel this connection with, and she's there and she welcomes them on the stairs, this wonderful portrait. And at the bottom of the stairs, this great work by Yinka Sholabare, who's another one of our fellows. So Yinka's at the bottom of the stairs and Michael is at the top, acting as this spine of this continuing contemporary narrative, but also something that's so triumphant in Trumpet Boy. Speaks to our musical history, speaks to our military history, speaks to the Enlightenment idea of education as a societal improver and the improver of young lives themselves, and is also inclusive in terms of the story it tells about our diverse children that we are, as I said, now being able to uncover more fully through this PhD that we're just having. And our exhibitions as well. So this was an exhibition we did last summer, showing for the first time 24 large-scale drawings that Quentin Blake has donated to the museum. It was called Gifted, and part of it was commissioning 7 writers and poets for the first time ever to turn the table to respond to Quentin's drawings. And some of those poems, the youngest poet was, I think, 19. And these poems, again, were taking quite challenging issues: the death of a mother, the loss of a pet, the sense of invisibility as a young person, racism. But again, very immediate for families and children, very, very powerful, and again, much loved. And what's wonderful for us is these drawings can now be kind of folded into our collections and our displays. And this process of stopping othering the children in our story. At the end of last year, for the first time in 280 years, we finally have portraits of the children. You can see 4 of them there. It's in fact 6, 5 that went up in the autumn, and a final one that's just been taken by Eileen Perrier. But these are former pupils of the Foundling Hospital. And it's really showing them as autonomous human beings, role models for the care leavers particularly that we work with. They are such an inspiration. So to have something that celebrates, acknowledges their remarkable history, and also for us, they are worthy of the great artists like the governors and the benefactors. So the artists who we commissioned were going up in order, as you see. So John's portrait was taken by Mahtab Hussain, Henry's by Gillian Edelstein, Ruth's by Wolfgang Tillmans, Lydia's by David Moore, and Jocelyn, who you can't see, Ingrid Pollard, and then the final one is that's in production by Eileen Perrier. So again, giving them that status. And the portrait of John is on mirror. Mahtab was interested in mirroring theory in terms of childhood development. So actually, you literally see yourself in the portrait as well, which is quite uncanny. But then finally, it's about giving the young people we work with a voice and enabling them to have their voice present in the stories and shape the stories and take control of the stories. This is a work that goes up. Every time we take it down, we're asked to put it back up. One brilliant comment was, where are those hateful shirts? Meaning, please bring them back. This was a project we did, which the final thing, that the young people, these were all young people who'd grown up in care, who were thinking about their own identity and how the words of the adults around them had shaped their sense of self, and each one created a shirt which had a name tag in the back, which was something that had been said to them that they felt had kind of something they hadn't been able to shake off. And the one in the middle, which is the one that I find most upsetting, is if you can't afford to bring a pen into school, don't bother coming in. And then Also our exhibitions, giving them a bigger hand in our exhibitions. This was a fantastic show that was curated by our, until recently, trustee, the artist Jeremy Deller, with sports banger, Johnny Banger, who is now a fellow. And it was the COVID letters, which was a project that was done during lockdown, during the first lockdown, when everybody got their letter from Boris Johnson telling them to stay in and save the NHS, Johnny put a call out on social media going, if you've got a letter, make a poster, 16 and under, no digital. And we showed over 200 posters made by children from 18 months up, expressing their opinions about the government and Boris Johnson and the NHS and what they were experiencing during lockdown. And these were displayed right through the museum, so not just in the temporary exhibition gallery, but all through our gallery space, and was an amazing opportunity to give a platform to children's voices, which again were completely unheard during lockdown. And this government certainly made no attempts, like a lot of governments did, to talk directly to children or to try and hear their responses. And so I think it's that thing about, you know, seeing yourself and hearing yourself. And what was quite interesting is when we had the press came, who in the main loved it, but I did have one critic going, I don't think it's very helpful hearing so many angry voices. You know, the children are so angry. And I was like, the children were already angry about a lot of things before you got this. The problem is, again, if you never ask children what they think, you know, you get this skewed sense of what they think and feel. And again, during lockdown, we were able to find ways using the kind of digital medium to bring the voices of people with lived experience, their interpretation of our collection, take it to a wider audience. This was a wonderful project we did called Shared Stories, Shared Voices, with 3 communities who were particularly affected by lockdown. The former pupils of the Foundling Hospital, our graduates, our care experience graduates, who were extraordinarily isolated during lockdown, most of the time alone in sort of single rooms in hostels and sheltered accommodation, assisted living, not assisted living, what am I talking about? Supported housing, thank you, and also some of our volunteers. And if you go to our website, you can hear them talking about the work in the collection that means most to them. And there are some hugely powerful ones where you have both our care leavers and former pupils talking about the same object. Yes, that a sense of relevance and connectedness. And finally, taking this forward, we are currently working with some of the care experience graduates from our training programs who are co-curating our spring show next year. It's going to be a show that involves major loans from the National Gallery, historic work, reinterpreting a number of our collection works, also commissioning contemporary work from artists. And it's looking at the theme of family. And it's really giving our young people, our care experience young people, the opportunity to have their voices heard, challenge, I think, both our historical assumptions and societal assumptions about family and what that is and what that means, and their perspective on the idea of family. It'll be part of our ongoing project to use our story and our collections and our exhibitions to remove the sense of stigma that young people particularly have, those young people who've grown up in care, and to continue to make our story relevant to everybody, but particularly to young people, and to find a way to talk about childhood that is inclusive in the widest sense, but is also shared and is one that children and young people have a say in, literally as well as figuratively. So that, on the nose of 10:30, is what we're up to. And I'd be delighted to take questions if anybody has any.